Howdy, y'all. It's your boy, back again. Took a little while off of making videos. Not because I wanted to, but just because I was exceptionally busy. And as you can see, with the exception of this cheaty little McDonald's bag, my room's clean. So I fucking cleaned my room. I told y'all I'd do it eventually, and I did. I'm sweaty because I just came back from a run and then took a hot shower. So I'm still sweaty from that, but I'm clean, okay? But today, I wanted to talk about the genre punk rabbit hole. You know, as I look back on the videos that I've made thus far in my return to YouTube, my steampunk obsession video seems to be the most successful. It has the most engagement, the most views, the most likes, and the short I made of it and the TikTok I made of it seem to be performing or outperforming all my other things so far. So I kind of wanted to talk more about this, not just to farm views, although that would be nice, but because I'm fixated on it, man. I can't stop fucking thinking about these things. Just genre punk as a whole, not just steampunk, but everything. I've got like a little list of them pulled up in my other monitor that I was going to reference. We're looking at cyberpunk, biopunk, nanopunk, steampunk, dieselpunk, atompunk, clockpunk, solarpunk, and lunarpunk. Those seem to be some of the bigger ones, especially the first three. And I kind of wanted to briefly talk about them. I'm by no means an expert in the subject of the genre punk discussion, but I like the idea of just fucking stimming for a second and talking about them. So just let me, dude. Just let me. I'll talk briefly about each of them and then kind of give general summation thoughts at the end, because I've found that doing the general summation thoughts is a good way of clipping shorts. That's just a really good way of doing that. I can kill two birds with one stone, okay? I work full time. I don't have time to be min-maxing everything. I just got to take what I can fucking get. So let's just hop right into it. Cyberpunk. So some of the big tenets about cyberpunk is obviously high-tech, shiny shit, being chromed the fuck out, to put it in like Cyberpunk 2077 or Edge Runners terms. And like kind of dystopian sci-fi settings. And like you've got bullshit corporations and you've got like fusing your body with technology. This is the OG. For those who didn't know, I did at least a modicum of research before talking about this, before just talking out my fucking ass. This was the first genre punk to earn the punk suffix. You know what I mean? I don't remember who said it, but like this is the OG. Cyberpunk is the grandfather of all the punks. Like, yeah, like steampunk and shit did exist, or at least tangential things did exist before cyberpunk was coined, but it was only retroactively after cyberpunk was coined, if I remember correctly, that they could go back and call steampunk, right? But yeah, cyberpunk is the OG, and that's the first punk I really even knew about, you know. I actually have not finished Cyberpunk 2077. I know it's heresy, but I have watched Cyberpunk Edge Runners. Fucking love that anime. Really, really good. And it did sell me on the vibe. I do have Cyberpunk 2077 from Steam library sharing with my friend, so I do intend on playing the game at some point and kind of delving deeper into that vibe. But it's a vibe that I think is very reliable, and it lends itself to good storytelling. I think that's why out of all the punk genres, this one is the most popular. And I think that it has stayed true to the punk aspect of it, you know, from my not so learned opinion. Obviously the cyber bit's easy. That's mostly set dressing. But the punk bit, I think that at least in terms of pop culture, it has still remained true. I know a big criticism of steampunk is that it lost a lot of the punk and it just relies so much on the steam, and it's lost its meaning. And some say that's for the better. Some say that's for the worse. But I think with cyberpunk, at least from what I've seen, there's not a similar discourse. I think that it's remained very political still, very anti-corporation, like anti-billionaire, anti-wage gap kind of stuff. And I really think that's cool. It creates inherent power dynamics that I think just make for compelling storytelling, especially if you're the guy on the bottom. You know, it gives you a great Herculean task to overcome, like a very powerful enemy. I think that it's well suited to that kind of thing. And especially in like today's day and age where you could argue the wage gap is like the worst it's ever fucking been. I think cyberpunk stories really resonate with people because they're feeling a lot of what's going on. And that's the thing about sci-fi in general. I've heard it said, I forgot who said it, but that sci-fi isn't really talking about the future. It's talking about now. It's just kind of using futuristic settings to sort of illustrate the point. And I think that this is what cyberpunk does, right? It's kind of talking about right now, but it's doing it in this really sick fucking way that allows you to engage with it comfortably, but also ask yourself really good questions. So I think cyberpunk, it keeps the cyber, obviously, but it keeps the punk, which is like super important. And I think it's like probably the most well done out of all the genre punks in the current pop culture zeitgeist. So moving on to biopunk. So according to my little notes here, I didn't write them. These are just ones I found on Google. But like, instead of computers and metal, it relies more so on like DNA, gene editing, and living biomachines. This one's really fucking cool because this is one of those things where like you ever have an idea and you're like, man, this is a fucking sick idea. I can't believe I came up with it all by myself and I'm the only one to ever think this. But then someone has obviously already thought of it because humans have existed for just way too long. That's kind of how biopunk feels to me. Because I have had this idea of like biomechanical organisms. They're like living machines that were produced organically. You know, like you were born metal. You were born with ports for cables. But they just existed by biological means. They weren't crafted by human hands or alien hands or whatever. And like your flesh is a sort of metal carapace. Almost like a crab. But instead of like chitinous bullshit, it's like metal bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of digressing here a bit, but I do think that that's like the most interesting part of biopunk. It's like biohacking, you know, but taken to like a very weird extreme. And what's cool about biopunk is because it's so much about biohacking, gene editing, living machines, biomechanical organisms, I feel like it could do really well in a horror genre fusion. Body horror is like super disturbing, you know? Humans don't want to see other humans be mutilated and malformed and shit. Like, it's something that speaks to us on a very instinctual level that's like very disturbing. And I feel like biopunk would be really good at kind of going there. That probably already exists. I'm probably not the first person to think of this. And there's probably like a whole swathe of material of shit that can just entertain me in that way. But I just think it's a really cool idea. Moving on to nanopunk. All right. So obviously it's in the name, nanotechnology. Think Iron Man's suit in Avengers Infinity War, focusing on tiny robots and how they can like get into the infrastructure of a functioning society. This one I don't really have much to say on because like it's one of those punks that's just a little too niche. I don't like, to me anyway, I don't look at anything and think, oh yeah, nanopunk. I'm not thinking that. I'm just thinking sci-fi. I've seen nanotechnology in so many sci-fi IPs that it doesn't really stand out. That's not the thing that stands out to me because it's not really an aesthetic. And maybe that's me just being squirrel-brained and being like, oh, shiny thing. Let me focus on that. But like biopunk, that's so easily recognizable to me if you see it in action. Cyberpunk is the most recognizable one if you see it in action, but it's like nanopunk, it's just down to that one specific technology as far as I know. So it's kind of the least interesting one so far. Moving on to steampunk. Y'all already know how I feel about this one, so I won't linger on it too long. It's become one of my favorites, especially in recent years. Like in the last couple years, it's become one of my favorites. I obviously like the idea of Victorian retrofuturism and seeing steam technology advanced past the point where we never moved on. We didn't go to the diesel age. We just stayed with steam. I do think that's very interesting, and I just like the way it looks and feels. There's really not much more I can say about it that I didn't already say in my previous video. So go ahead and watch that one if you want. It's a good video, I think. But here's what I will say. I heard it described, this is another quote, but I saw it in a YouTube comment. That's when I first saw it. That like, steampunk is what happens when goths discover the color brown. And once I heard that, I was like, holy shit, that's so fucking accurate, dude. But like, I don't know. I think it's sick. Obviously, go watch my video on it if you're really curious about it. Fucking love steampunk. I've got a steampunk fantasy novel coming out in the relative near future. It's finished. It's in the beta reading stages. Stay tuned for that. Dieselpunk. Dieselpunk is up next. And let me tell you, this one is quickly becoming very, very interesting to me. So dieselpunk is to the 1920s through 40s like the pre and during World War II, World War I-ish, like post-World War I, pre-World War II, but also kind of during World War II era, where the main driver is diesel, i.e. fuel, some kind of fuel source. It doesn't necessarily have to be diesel, but like you get the point. Smog, petrol, gasoline, or in the case of something like Gears of War, emulsion, which is like a very Planet Sarah specific kind of substance. That is the reason why the locusts are the way they are, right? That's really cool, and it's gritty. It's fucking gritty. It's the edgy one. It's steampunk's edgy younger brother. Fuck, I'm diesel, bro. Fuck. Stupid. I'm stupid. But, like, you get the point. And here's where I think dieselpunk gets even more interesting, right? Well, first, let me back up. Like, narratively, a lot of what it has to do with is a lot of, like, noir. And it can lend itself to detective stories because it's taking on the aesthetic of the Roaring 20s and the 1930s and 1940s. And that was very popular at the time. And that's cool. That's cool with me. But one thing that I really like about dieselpunk is that it often gets fused with something that's not on my list here, but decopunk. Now we're getting into the fucking weeds, dude. We're getting into the niche bullshit. Decopunk, which takes aesthetics from the Art Deco period of the Roaring 20s, right? And fusing that with dieselpunk, that fucking tickles me in a way that I can't hardly describe, know what I'm saying? Like, that is such a fucking cool aesthetic. There's just a little bit of smog and a little bit of beauty. Because I think one thing about the sort of Victorian Art Nouveau, Art Deco period, so we're talking like the late 1800s to the early 1900s, like, there is this kind of obsession with absolute decadent beauty that I really fucking like about that time period. Every era has its beauty, but it's like, say if you look at a modern mansion now, a lot of it, modern art, is very simplistic, and you might like that, but I've always been a fan of very weird designs. I like weird shit, and I like shit that stands out. For the longest time I had a mohawk because some people fucking hate mohawks and some people think they're really sick. I liked having a hairstyle that evoked a reaction, especially when I was younger. Like, I didn't want it to just be like, oh, you're a biracial dude, you've got like a fade like every other dude. I'm just like, cool, yeah, I mean, that's the go-to. It's like, if you're biracial, you just probably have a fade, that's just like what I had for so long. But it's like, I just had a mohawk. It was polarizing and I liked that about it. And that's what I like about sort of the late 1800s through early 1900s, is that a lot of the art had such a fucking unique identity that, like, I could see if you were to look back on it today, you'd probably either love it or fucking hate it, like, especially when you get into like Art Nouveau, Belle Epoque, or however you pronounce that, that's kind of the aesthetic that games like Clair Obscur Expedition 33 take, where it's very much what it is. Like, how else do you describe that? It is what the fuck it is, but like a lot. Articulate. I claim to be a writer and I say dumb shit like that. But like, I fucking love that. And like, this is all to say that dieselpunk lends itself to exploring shit like that. So does steampunk. But like, especially if you want to go the Art Deco kind of vibe, dieselpunk melds with that very well because they're based on like the same time period, even if in a retro futuristic sense. So let's move on to atompunk. Atompunk moves it to the 50s and 60s, the atomic age, where like everything's like nuclear, and then that's where you get the shit like the like spacesuits, the very pulpy ray guns, and like there's a lot of hope, but there's a lot of uncertainty too. And I feel like the poster child of atompunk is like the Jetsons. Y'all ever watch the Jetsons? I don't know. Like, I mean, I know people my age and older, maybe not even my age, like late 20s, like know what the Jetsons is because it was a very classic cartoon. Like, if you ever watched Boomerang, but like, if you're a little younger, you might not know what it is. Look it up. That's basically what atompunk is. There's like more realistic art pieces that you can just find on like Google Images or whatever that'll give you an even clearer picture. But if you're looking for like a really iconic example from pop culture, I would probably go with the Jetsons. And this is one of those things, retrofuturism of the 50s and 60s. I feel like everyone has seen this vibe before, even if you didn't know that's what it was called, because that's how I felt when I was looking these things up. I didn't know it was called atompunk, but now that I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's like if you go to a 50s diner, but it's sci-fi from the 50s. You know, it's very, very pulpy. And if you read a lot of like classic science fiction, I feel like you'll see a lot of that. There's a very just vintage feel to it. And even though it's older technically than things like dieselpunk in the sense that it's retrofuturism for a later era, I feel like atompunk was more popular back in the day. Whereas like I don't see a lot of dieselpunk that was popular back in the day. It's like very niche. If like a lot of like my favorite dieselpunk property is Gears of War. Pretty sure that counts. And it's like that's a very modern like 2000s, 2010s sort of property. And if you go back far enough, it's not like you're seeing more dieselpunk. You're probably seeing less. But if you go back, you see more atompunk. You know, I just feel like it was way more popular back in the day, in the early like pulpy stages of science fiction novels. But moving on to clockpunk, I don't really have much to say about this. It's like Renaissance era, sort of retrofuturism, and everything's about clocks and gears. I feel like that's pretty much all that needs to be said, because a lot of the times too, while this is Renaissance era, a lot of the aesthetic gets carried over into steampunk. There's a lot of clocks and gears. They're very closely related, although it's sort of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. It's sort of like that. Like steampunk in a lot of cases is also clockpunk, but clockpunk does not necessarily need to be steampunk. You know what I mean? Like it can rely on sort of energy generated by the turning of cogs, sort of like simple machinery or even slightly complex machinery. It's not necessarily steam that would have to be doing everything. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a very cool aesthetic. But usually in any kind of case where I might be in the mood for clockpunk, I would just default to steampunk. Kind of where I am with that. And then there's two more. Solarpunk. This one's interesting because this one feels very utopian to me. It's bright, it's very hopeful, and it's about living in harmony with the environment, especially like solar power. It's very clean, not environmentally dangerous. I'm married to an environmentalist, so I mean, needless to say, she's very interested in solarpunk. And like preserving the planet is a very big core of that. And I think that in sci-fi in particular, it's very easy to sort of lean into dystopias. But with solarpunk, it's a very inherently positive genre. And I really like that. I think it's very refreshing. Obviously, not everything can just be sunshine and rainbows. But in solarpunk, that's kind of the point. Obviously, if you're a competent writer, you can make anything positive or negative. You can have a dystopian solarpunk world. Maybe you should write that if you're watching this. That could be very cool. But yeah, I do like that. Of all the genres we've talked about thus far, this is the most hopeful one. And when you just need a fucking palate cleanser, if you're just in the depths of cyberpunk and dieselpunk and everything is so gritty and negative all the time, solarpunk can be that nice fucking palate cleanser that just brings you out of it. I really like solarpunk as an aesthetic. Seriously, look it up. It's very refreshing. Makes you feel nice and clean, nice and at home. Make a good screensaver, man. Then the last one I want to talk about is lunarpunk. As the name suggests, this is just the opposite of solarpunk. It's just night shit. So like think night elves. Night elves from World of Warcraft, bro. Like that is the probably epitome of this kind of thing. Or even like the first Avatar movie, like the Blue People Avatar, not Avatar the Last Airbender, but like that's lunarpunk. The moon, like imagine Pandora at night or fucking the Night Elf Starting Zone. The name eludes me. It's been a while. But like imagine that. Nighttime, beautiful purpley hued elves, glowing fungi, plants, bioluminescence, a huge focus on nocturnal creatures and the beauty of that. It's not meant to be dark and scary. It's meant to be dark but beautiful. Dark in a very literal sense, not thematically dark. And I think it's arguably the most beautiful in my opinion of all of these. Like they all have a really sick aesthetic, but like dieselpunk, you're not looking at dieselpunk with the intent of calling it beautiful. It can be, but it's like that's not necessarily the main appeal. The grit, the smog, the grime, the ugliness is kind of the point. Whereas like with lunarpunk, the beauty of the night is the focus. The bioluminescence is like probably the most really locked in part of it for me. I just love that look, man. Night Elf core. I always played a fucking Night Elf Druid, World of Warcraft. Holla at your boy. But yeah. So that's just a quick look into all these punks, right? So I'll give my closing thoughts. When it comes to cyberpunk, I think that one is like the most well structured in terms of storytelling inherently. Obviously, they all can be, but I feel like cyberpunk is just a really great setting for storytelling that just comes inherent to the thing. Biopunk, I think, is visually the most striking in terms of like the effect it can have on you. Especially, I think it would do really well in horror, fucking with the bio-augmenting of it all. Nanopunk is very much so, I think, just such a very niche thing that I think could be a part of something larger that could be really cool. On its own, I don't know that it's enough to sustain a whole vibe for me, but that's just me personally. Steampunk is something that I've fallen in love with, obviously, in recent years, and I love the mix of Victorian and steam-powered energy. I love that whole look, and I love the hopefulness that comes with it. Dieselpunk, I think, is becoming a sleeper hit for me, especially when you fuse it with decopunk. I think the two are very good together, and I like how gritty it is, but I like the retrofuturism of that time period specifically. It's very cool for me. Atompunk, I think, is very pulpy, and it reminds me of like reading old science fiction books, and I really like that about it. It feels vintage. It feels the most vintage out of all of these. Clockpunk, I think, is very cool, and I think that it works really well when paired with steampunk. On its own, I'm not quite as interested, I'll be honest. Obviously, there's exceptions to every rule, but I think that mixed with steampunk is when it really comes alive. Solarpunk is a nice palette cleanser. I think it looks great. It has a great message, and it would probably be the one that of all these punks you'd probably want to live in the most. And then lunarpunk, I think, is objectively the most beautiful, just in my opinion. That whole bioluminescent nighttime beauty night elf look, I really like. So I hope this was very interesting to you, maybe, hopefully. It was super interesting to me. I just had to fucking rant about it for what's it been, 22 minutes now? And hey, if this sparked any of your creative world building or writing, fucking great, man. I certainly am going to think about this stuff going forward into my creative journey. I'm working on something right now that's very diesel deco punk fusion, and I'm really liking it. So, let me know if there's any kind of idea you got from this. Maybe you can give me inspiration. Hopefully any of this inspired you, and I'll see y'all later. Peace. If I can turn the fucking thing off, where's my mouse? Okay, bye.